Okay, this week we're going to talk about coaching. And actually, Kirk Brothers in the book had 2 chapters on coaching. So because of Thanksgiving, we're combining those 2 chapters up. So there's a big section of information to cram into this week. And then the lesson for next week, there's only 12 pages. So we're going to have a taffy pull next week. All right. In coaching, just this whole idea of preparing the leaders, of Jesus getting the apostles ready for what they're going to have to do when Jesus is gone. And so he's having to get them trained in order to do so. And he's coaching them he has about a year and a half to work with the apostles before his departure. So Winston Churchill, what a funny place to begin. Who was Winston Churchill? England. Prime Minister. Leader.
Speech.
He had several famous quotes. Yeah. Never give up, never quit. This is one that he said. There is a special moment when a person is figuratively tapped on the shoulder and offered a chance to do a very special thing, unique to him and fitted to his talents. What a tragedy if that moment finds him unprepared or unqualified for the work that would have been his finest hour. He was chosen to be the Prime Minister of England during World War II. And so, and he said his greatest fear is war. And yet he is basically trying to lead the United Kingdom through all of that turmoil from World War II. He was the right person in the right place. So he did a great job. Leaders, where do they come from? Winston Churchill was a prominent, what do they call them? They don't call them politicians, not bureaucrat. What's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, he was a prominent statesman in London, and so he was obviously a prominent person in order for them to say, hey, we want you to be the Prime Minister. So where do leaders come from, though?
The populace.
The populace? How do they get appointed to be leader?
Knowledge. Background.
Some background?
There has to be some motivation for that, because someone had told me when I was in high school that I was going to be a principal or a superintendent or any leader in education.
You'd have laughed.
No, they'd have laughed. Don't tell him that. But I think you have to be motivated from without and from within. I think it's a matter of, I think some of it is spontaneous, but some of it is directed on how we study the Bible and how we recognize the importance, men and women, of how we're going to lead a family, how we're going to lead a neighborhood. It's not just a coin toss.
You're going to be our closer tonight, huh?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, something that I read about Truman. Truman didn't have a college degree, but he was a prodigious reader. And one thing that was cool about the Army back in World War I, when he first signed up, and he basically barely got in because he couldn't see, that the Army actually would appoint an officer out of the enlistment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how he got his commission, was he actually was appointed from the enlistment. And just some of the things that he had as a leader, he always wanted to know what the right answers were. He, in that position as the officer, he trained like ferociously to make sure everybody was prepared when the time actually came to go to war.
Yeah. You just made me think of Sandra Day O'Connor. Are y'all familiar with her story. She was a Supreme Court justice, and she was born and raised in Arizona. The ranch that she lived on, it was 9 miles to the nearest paved road. So they're in the middle of nowhere. She was pretty much homeschooled, and once she got to a certain age, they sent her to El Paso to live with grandma to go to a girls' school, and then she was accepted into Stanford at the age of 14. And I mean, just like I say, she was a reader. They didn't have running water or electricity at their house. She grew up on a ranch in the middle of nowhere, and ended up being a Supreme Court justice. So how you go from, you know, that beginning to obtaining the position she did, that's pretty impressive. Okay, this next line was just some funnies I put up. Where are we gonna find these leaders? Well, we'll just order them off Amazon or go to Leaders R Us to get our next leader. Leaders from the womb. Some people, they say, are born to lead. And if you're in certain countries, because of who you are, you were born into a royal family, so that's gonna be your role. Like it or not, you're gonna be the next king. Whether you're ready or to handle that situation. Or Shakespeare said, some are born great, some achieve greatness, some have it thrust upon them. Because of the accolades that a lot of military generals received, they come home to become presidents and prominent people. They achieve it. Like I said, some are born into it, but some have it thrust upon them, being forced to be the leader. Kindergarten teachers, bless their hearts. In the beginning, you're herding cats. You really are trying to get however many kids you have, and they're all going different directions, wanting to do different things and touch everything, and you're trying to just get them down to the lunchroom or whatever. And so, you know, after a few days, you finally have some organized chaos, and you've got them kind of walking in a line. Everyone wants to be the line leader. And they have to, you know, they end up making a chart or something to figure out, okay, who's our line leader today, and figure all that out. They want to be the leader. Nobody wants to follow. They all want to be the leader, the front of the line. One day they're going to be a valedictorian or maybe even president. I'm not familiar with the Lads to Leaders. I like the name. It's a neat concept. You're going to start when they're young, training them to be leaders. And I think the church, some congregations are doing very good at that. Some need a little help. Let's see, John Maxwell has a leadership Bible, and he said this: the Son of God invested the vast majority of his time with 12, not 1,200. Jesus practiced the axiom, more time with less people equals greater kingdom impact. When I was growing up, and we would go to church camp, and you never knew what to expect. You know, you're some friends, you get together, let's go to this camp. And you go to camp, and, you know, we went one year, and it was less than 30 kids. It was a new director, not very popular. Nobody was going to that session for some reason. But because it was so small, we got to know everybody really well. We became real close, and I'm still good friends with all those campers. But then word got out, that camp was real popular. You know, it more than doubled in size the next year, and then the next year after that, there was like 120 kids. I mean, we barely had enough beds. We're having to move bunks around and make room for, you know, let's see if we can squeeze another bunk in here to put 2 more kids in. It's just crazy. But you know what? It wasn't as enjoyable. There were so many people, it was hard to get to know someone as closely as we had in previous years because there are just so many people. It was just overwhelming. I think that happens a lot of times in the churches. People prefer a smaller church because it's more intimate. Larger churches, you get lost in the crowd. It's easy to, you come in, I'm here, mark myself here, and you don't get to know people very well. Thankfully, we have programs like Welcome Home, Brothers Keepers, and things to where we can sit down and visit and get to know people a little better. And it's funny, I've known the Gars family for, 18 years? How long have we been in? 17 or 18 years. They're in our BK this year, and we sit down at our first BK luncheon, and we're visiting, and they ask Mom and Dad, where are you from? And Mom said, well, I'm from Baptiste, Oklahoma. This little bitty town way down in southeastern Oklahoma, about an hour from Broken Bow. And she said, really? She said, my mom's from Baptiste. Yeah. It never came up in the previous 17 or 18 years because they weren't here was one of it, but just in sitting and visiting with them, that's not something that would come up. Well, now we have a new connection, new things to talk about. So I think North MacArthur is really blessed with those programs, and that's really good that we get to know each other. Let's see, back over to here. Good to Great, a book by Jim Collins, and he's doing a lot of research on leadership, and he was looking at companies, and he said, there's good companies and then there's great companies. What's the difference between a good company and a great company? What makes a company great? And so he was looking at their leadership to see what was the difference. And this is what he found. They didn't decide where the bus was going and then try to get people on board. The very first thing they did is get the right people on the bus. We got to get the right people in the right place. Not only get them on the bus, you got to get them in the right seat, the right job, the right role within the company. Find out what they want to do, what they do best, and see if we can figure out a way to get them to do that. You get the wrong people off the bus. Elon Musk is going through that. He takes over Twitter and he's having to decide who's going to stay and who's going to go. And let's see, background checks. Kirk Brothers talked in the book about, the church needs to do a better job, needs to do a good job on checking out these guys. You're going to hire a new youth minister. Well, we don't know much about him. Let's do a background check on him. Let's find out where he went to church and find out what they have to say about it, what they recommend. Once you get everybody on the bus, then you're going to figure out where you're going to drive it. And Jesus put the right people on the bus. Even Judas Iscariot was the right person on the bus. He had a role to play in the story of Christ. And he was essential. He needed to be on the bus. The apostle bus, it's about a year and a half into his ministry. So these guys probably have been following him around for a year and a half. They've gotten to know him. They knew where he was from. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Well, let's follow him and see. And so they've known him for a while. 11 of the 12 were from Galilee, from the northern region up there. And I've got a map coming up next. We'll look at all that. Cana, Bethsaida, Capernaum. Diversity, fisherman, tax collector, a zealot. Thinking about all the apostles, who is the most prominent person in that list?
I was saying Peter.
That's what she said. Peter. Okay, well, If you're a Roman centurion and you know these 12 guys, who would the Romans think is probably the most prominent person in the list? The tax collector. They would recognize Matthew because of his contacts with the Roman government. So they would probably think he's closer to the leadership of the apostles than Peter, James, and John. Before Jesus made the decision and chose these 12 men out of all of the crowd that's been following him around, he spent the night in prayer. Before making that big decision. Their position, their power, that wasn't important to him. Jesus looks at the heart. When Israel was going to anoint a king or want to anoint a king, and they're trying to decide who it's going to be. No, it's not this one, because don't look at his stature, because God looks at their heart. Jesus looks at the heart of these men, and he picked them out. There's no wealthy landowners, no priests, no kings. There's nobody that is society would consider a prominent person. These are a bunch of kids that just came off of Galilee. They've been fishing, most of them. But they ended up being committed leaders. Jesus was training them to become the leaders that they became to lead the church. Okay, here's a map. Show you where everybody was from. Philip was from Bethsaida. And this long list, Peter, Andrew, James, John, Thomas, Matthew, James, and Judas, not Iscariot, son of Alphaeus, were all from Capernaum. I read that Capernaum at the time of Jesus, the population was about 1,500 that lived there. And going back to the list, let's see. We know that Peter and Andrew were brothers. James and John were sons of Zebedee. And I read one reference that said that James and John were actually first cousins of Jesus. Matthew and James, I believe, they're both sons of Alphaeus. So they may be brothers if it's the same Alphaeus. Nathaniel, John calls him Bartholomew, Bar, son of Ptolemy. And so that was the name that the Gospel of John refers to him as. But Nathaniel was from Cana. Well, now we have Simon the Zealot. And the Greek word for zealot is K-N-A-N-I-T-E-S. And so Jerome thought that he also was from Cana. And that Cananites. So that was kind of ruled out. Another writer said that he's a Canaanite, meaning he's from down here somewhere. But other writers said, no, this word doesn't have anything to do with geography. It's not a location, but it means that he was a zealous person. He was a group of the zealots. And then finally we have Judas Iscariot. He's from a little town called Kerioth, that's just south of Hebron. So he's the only one from down south of Jerusalem. Everybody else is from Galilee, up above. All right, a commitment target. In the outer ring, the Pharisee spies, they're not committed. They're just on a fact-finding tour, trying to find things out. They're not really disciples. The next ring, you've got people who came to hear, see the miracles, not really followers, not really committed. They're there maybe for entertainment, who knows. The next ring, they're believers, but their commitment is limited. I'm only going to follow him so far. I'm not going to go to that area. So the disciples that followed, that were more committed. The 70 or 72 that were sent out would be in this group, in this ring. And then finally you get to the apostles. The handpicked eyewitnesses, they are highly committed. They're being trained and shaped to be the next leaders. Preparing all these passengers. He educated them, he involved them, he evaluated them, and he encouraged them. So guess what the next 4 slides are going to be? Educating them, involved them, evaluated them, and encouraged them. Jesus saw the best in people. He looked at the hearts, and he knew this person is going to be useful. Even Judas. Just like as you read through the Bible and you read about Pharaoh and Nebuchadnezzar and how God used foreign rulers as a tool, an instrument for his service to get things done. Judas filled that role. He was prophesied about that he was going to betray Christ. And I don't think up until the night he betrayed Jesus, the apostles didn't know. Of course, when they wrote the Gospels, they say, and Judas, who betrayed him, they're bad mystery writers. But Judas is working side by side with them. He went out with them when they sent out the 70, when they sent out the 12. He was right there with them. And at the supper when Jesus talked about one of them was going to betray him, they didn't know who. They didn't all immediately turn and go, "Bet it's him." They said, "Who is it?" They didn't know. Let's look at it. John 13, 21 to 30. Get my cheaters on. And when he said these things, Jesus was greatly distressed in spirit and testified, "I tell you the solemn truth, one of you will betray me." The disciples began to look at one another, worried and perplexed to know which of them he was talking about. One of his disciples, the one Jesus loved, was at table to the right of Jesus in a place of honor. So Simon Peter gestured to this disciple to ask Jesus who it was he was referring to. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved leaned back against Jesus' chest and asked him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus replied, "It's the one to whom I will give the piece of bread after I've dipped it in the dish." Then he dipped the piece of bread in the dish and gave it to Judas Iscariot, Simon's son. After Jesus took the piece of bread, Satan entered into him. And Jesus said to him, "What you're about to do, do quickly." Now none of those present at the table understood why Jesus said this to Judas. Some thought that because Judas had the money box, Jesus was telling him to buy whatever they needed for the feast or give something to the poor. Judas took the piece of bread and went out immediately. Now it was night. They didn't know who it was. They didn't realize Judas. They did ahead of time. They didn't realize Judas was going to be the one to betray him. Questions? Comments?
That's what Judas knew.
Yeah, until Satan entered his heart. I don't think he did. Okay, so we're going to look at, he educated them, involved them, evaluated them, and encouraged them. So he educated them. They've been with him probably for the year and a half prior to being picked to be an apostle. They've been listening to his lessons. They observed his teaching style. He lectured, he told parables, he discussion questions, role play. John 6, 5 and 6, he asked Philip, where are we going to find bread to feed all these people. Jesus knew what he was going to do. He was just getting Philip to think outside the box. The whole time, the apostles were being instructed in discipleship, in leadership. They were going through training, whether they realized it or not. Jesus is preparing them to be the leaders they had to be, how to live godly lives. Paul wrote to Ephesians in 4:12 to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. And the Hebrew writer in 13:21, equip you with every good thing to do his will. That's what Jesus was doing with the apostles. He's equipping them with what they needed for after he's gone. Stan Mitchell wrote a book, Equipping the Saints for Ministry. And he said, no equipment without commitment. He involved them. Luke 9, 1-5. After Jesus called the 12 together, he gave them power and authority over all demons and to cure diseases, and he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. He said to them, take nothing for your journey, no staff, no bag, no bread, no money, and do not take an extra tunic. Whatever house you enter, stay there until you leave the area. Wherever they do not receive you, as you leave that town, shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. He gave them power and authority over demons and to cure diseases. Do you remember back to when you just got your driver's license and your parents gave you the keys so you could go drive somewhere? Or go to the store and buy some butter. You know, that's a power. They've enabled you. They've given you the authority to take the car, go for a drive. Jesus has given them the keys, and he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. So here's your job description. I'm going to give you this power. This is what I want you to go do with it. Go proclaim the kingdom, heal the sick. And then here's the protocols. Don't take anything with you. Don't even pack an extra cloak, tunic. You're going to go, and wherever you're welcome, stay there. If you're not welcome, leave and shake the dust off when you leave. Next, he evaluated them. Of course, they come back, and when the apostles returned, they told Jesus everything they had done. Then he took them with him, and they withdrew privately to a town called Bethsaida. We didn't hear much about the evaluation in there, but I'm sure he was explaining to them, you know, this is good. We're taking the next step. And now in chapter 10, it's the 70 that's sent out, 72 that's sent out, depending on the translation. Then the 72 returned with joy, saying, Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name. They were excited that they had this power and this authority. And then Jesus said, nevertheless, do not rejoice that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names stand written in heaven. Rejoice that your name is written in heaven. Next, he encouraged them. That's a long text. I'm not going to read all that. He talks to them about the fact that they are sheep being sent out among wolves. And he's telling them that you're going to be arrested. They're going to drag you before the proconsul. You're going to be put on trial. And you're going to have to face a lot of problems. He's letting them know this isn't going to be easy. But the thing that he says to them 4 times in this text, don't be afraid. Whenever they hand you over for trial, do not worry about how to speak or what to say, for what you should say will be given to you at that time. Verse 26, do not be afraid of them. Verse 28, do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Instead, fear the one who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. So do not be afraid. You are more valuable than many sparrows. He's talking about our sparrows, that God recognizes the sparrows. How many times in the Old Testament were the Israelites told, don't be afraid?
So this is just like Joshua.
Yeah. And that's, I think Joshua's speech, it's a lot like I have a dream speech, because it gets repeated several times. You hear it. Don't be afraid. Jesus trusted the apostles. He gave them the keys to the car. He gave them power and authority over demons, to heal the sick. He didn't send angels. Jesus didn't send angels to spread the message about his kingdom. He picked 12 men to do this job, to spread the news. Handpicked, hand-chosen. He trusted the fate of the world to these 12 men. He chose the right men to make the right decisions. That was the guys on his bus. The application. Believe in and see the best in people. You do that, you see someone and you see the best in them. I'm guilty, I see the worst in them. I'm not very good at seeing the best in people. But in order to be good encouragers and build up the church, we need to recognize those people around us. Let them know, hey, you're doing a good job with this ministry. This new work that you're starting, this is great.
I think sometimes we're just cautious, whether I believe in them to see the best. We're a society of people that have been fooled a lot of times.
Yeah.
And I think, are they really that good? Maybe I'm more cautious than I am not finding the best in people, because I want to try them out and just see what they're like.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're even that way when it comes to friends. I think we're a little bit cautious about forming friendships with people, because how well do I have to know them before I call them a friend? And in a lot of cases I've been wrong, just dead wrong about them. I'm just glad I got to know them, because the longer I got to be with them, the better I could judge them. It's not a good thing to do, but judge their intentions, so forth.
That's right, I remember who it was, the preacher that said, somebody said, you're judging me, and he said, no, I'm a fruit inspector. At our last BK meeting, I was really surprised. We walked in, and here's three guys I have never seen before in my life. Do you remember this? Did you go visit with them?
I do.
Yeah. It's some people that Dale just met. They were sitting on the sidewalk over here by the Sunshine Diner. And he invited them, we're getting ready to have a meal. Why don't y'all come over and join us? Well, okay. A free meal? I don't know if we'll ever see them again. But Dale reached out to these guys, invited them in, and they ate with us, and then they left. They didn't stick around very long. They got their stomach full and headed out. Jesus took a boat full of young fishermen, and he saw the next generation of the evangelists. These are the people that are going to be leading my church. Build people up, not tear them down. That's a challenge. Something for us to work on. Something for me to work on anyway. Leaders are responsible to equip and train workers. We are to help somebody out. If somebody's never taught a class, but they're interested, hey, you need some help? Do you want me to come sit in class with you? And there's things you can do that will help them out, encourage them, support them. Some of them would be like, you're going to judge me. I don't want you to see me. This would be embarrassing to go in and have to teach a class for the first time. But maybe they want something like that. They need somebody to be there to have their back. Leaders are developed, not born. And that's what Jesus was doing with the 12 apostles. He is developing them into the role that they're eventually going to take over. I already talked about being born into a royal family, and you're just expected to be a leader. But even some of them will say, I don't want that role. Let somebody else have it. Getting the right people into the right spot. Y'all remember this little Tupperware toy? Mm-hmm. The little shape sorter? There's some people that they didn't have those as toys growing up, and it's obvious when you see them trying to load these big pieces of furniture into a little trunk of their car. Sorry. Evaluations. You got standards, expectations, goals. So a preacher comes in, and he's got in his mind what the audience expects of him. The elders, they each have in their mind what they expect of him, the standards they expect from him, maybe goals that they would like to obtain. And then all the people in the audience, all the members, they have expectations and standards and goals. But if they're not communicated, if they're not written down, spoken, and in the book, Kirk Brothers, he talks about every time he would go to the meeting, he would be sure and write all this down. And he talks a lot about evaluations. And at the university where he teaches, everybody, I think it's every 2 years, everybody gets some sort of evaluation. And everybody on campus gives him an evaluation. Well, how am I doing? And he said he'll walk through the halls periodically and just pop into the one of the professors' offices. How are you doing? You need anything? And just checking up on him. There's sometimes expectations that if they're not written down, how is a preacher going to know what's expected of him? He has one set of standards in mind, and if everybody else has a different set of standards, how's that going to work out? It usually won't have a clear understanding. Everybody needs to be on the same page. Everybody knows what we want you to do, what's expected of you. evaluate if the standards are being followed. That's what you're looking at. Kurt Brothers said in the book that his administrative assistant, the evaluation form, here is a written description. Here's your job description written on a sheet of paper. Do you agree with this? Is this what we're asking of you? And is there more that we ask of you? Are there other things that we need to write down? What are we making you do that's not on here? Oh, well, and so they write those things down. Are you okay with doing these things, or do you want us to find somebody else to do that task? And, do we need to assign that to someone else? So anyway, they have a very open communication to evaluate everything. Examine if the expectations are being met. And as the university, are they doing everything to meet your expectations? Is there something more that you need, that you want from us? Church leadership, he spent several pages talking about the elders and giving lots of examples, evaluating them. Have you ever heard of a church evaluating elders? There was also a warning to be careful and the idea of a weak member attacking and saying that they didn't like this elder because his shoes didn't match his shirt or something.
The answer to that is yes, I have.
Oh, yeah?
And I'm not sure that it ever worked out very well.
Yeah.
Because you don't know the ulterior motives of what are the criteria that you're evaluating them on.
Yeah.
And I think it has to be made very clear. You have to teach them, members, sheep, how they're to include things within that evaluation.
I know people too, that come and actually sit with the elders before they even decide to join the church to find out where they stand. They evaluate it at the very beginning to see if it is biblical and falls into what it believes.
I've heard of that a few times. Not anything I've ever done.
You've been in a congregation where you're required to meet with them before you place them.
Oh, yeah? Well, and Kelly knew me from college. And so we'd been visiting for a while, and he came up to me one day and said, "Are you ever going to place membership here?" And I said, "Well, we're going to be out of town for spring break next week." I said, "After spring break, we were planning to place membership." He said, "Okay." And so we went to Branson, and the Sunday we came back, he met me at the door and handed me a card to fill out. "Here, sign this." Reaffirming them. Periodically, just whenever, even they said when you appoint new elders, and North MacArthur kind of does that, have all the elders come up onto the stage and are up in front of the audience and reaffirm them as the shepherds. Ensuring that they continue to meet qualifications. Turning over the keys. He talked about sometimes, and I've seen churches where elders micromanage and they have to have their finger on everything. And, okay, you're the deacon over education. Okay, well, I need to order some educational material, some books for the classroom. Okay, well, give us a quote and let us see, how much is it going to be? And then they would approve it, so you could order it, and then when it came in, you had to give them the bill, and they signed it. And Kurt Brothers talked in the book about if the elders don't extend that authority to the deacons to let them spend money like that, then there's a problem. And you need to turn the keys over. Let them be in charge of their area of work and have some latitude to do what they need to do.
one of the reasons that happens is because when it does happen, a key feature is you lose trust.
Yeah.
When trust is gone both ways, or just one way or the other, then it's a lose-lose situation.
Next point was delegating, letting them do what they were appointed to do. You're the deacon over this area, go do it. Go take care of that. All right, thanks for all your comments and everything. Next week, we'll talk about the character of Jesus. And like I say, we may have to pull some taffy or something. Let's have a word of prayer before we go. Dear God, thank you so much for this beautiful day that we've had. Thank you for the time that we've had to study a portion of your word. Father, help us as we go out this week to see the best in people. Help us to find ways to encourage and strengthen the church. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.